Okay, greetings everyone and welcome to CRWS book study on Bring the War Home, the White Power Movement and Paramilitary America by Kathleen Belew. This episode we will be talking about chapter 1 and the introduction. So we can get started on general thoughts on the introduction and any comments that anyone had. I would say that I agree with constructive action. I felt like there was a lot of double speak and a lot of interesting phrasing. And one thing that I thought was very interesting was that the author seems to imply that, even from this picture, it seems like the author is implying that these white power, as she calls them, groups, their biggest enemy is the state. She didn't necessarily give a definition of what the state would be, so I'm assuming she means the government, and I guess the major, the major players or the major people in the government, which I thought was interesting because I don't necessarily know if those two groups are at odds or, sorry, have as much conflict as the book implies. So that was the first thing that I thought was interesting. I'm wondering if anyone else had any thoughts on that, because frequently in the introduction, she puts that these people were trying to wage war on the state.
Yeah, I think anytime I heard her say state, I thought she said system. So that's what I wrote down.
For me, I, I guess I assumed that when she was talking about state, she was talking about the white people in charge. So maybe the smarter, more powerful white people. That's what what my definition of the state would be.
Yep, I see her as documenting and describing white supremacists in really interesting terms. But yeah, when she's referring to the state or to the government, I understand that to be the system of white supremacy, the system of incorrect government.
I agree with that. And I think too, so I'm reading from, I don't have the specific page, I apologize, but it says, instead, white power activists increasingly saw the state as their enemy. Many pursued the idea of an all-white racial nation, one that transcended national borders to unite white people from the United States, Canada, Europe, Australia, South Africa, and beyond. So I guess one thing that I was wondering is, do you think that that goal of an all-white racial nation is different from well, I guess when she says the state, we can say the system. In what ways do you think it's different? In what ways do you not? Like personally, me, I think that it may be different in that maybe they are not seeking an all-white state, but they're still seeking a state in which white people dominate. So maybe that is their conflict, is that they are having a conflict in basically how to execute white supremacy.
For me, if I understand the question correctly, I think that really what I'm seeing or what I'm getting from this is that there are two groups of white people who are dissatisfied with one another and how they're running the system. One group wants a all white nation, which I don't think is the goal of white supremacy. I think the goal of white supremacy or the goal of the white supremacists is to keep the system going. So if an all white nation exists, I don't. Okay, well, when I think about that, I was gonna say I don't think that is the goal of white supremacy, right? Because there's no non-white people. But That doesn't mean that there couldn't be non-white people elsewhere on the planet. But I don't think that that's what the white supremacist wants, is a all-white nation. So for me, I'm just seeing white people fighting amongst each other, having large disagreements and how exactly they want the system to be ran, or who has power, the strategies of how the system should be ran. So I hope that made sense.
Do you see this as maybe a form of white sacrifice? That's what I'm kind of seeing. It's infighting between white people. One wants to practice racism, white supremacy one way, another one wants to practice it another. So one group is sending the other group off to war and to do the dirty work, quote unquote. Sorry about using the metaphor or whatever. I'm trying to purge that from my vocabulary and be more direct. But you're sending off the white supremacists that you don't agree with to go fight in the war so that they look like the bad guys. This book, we're not the bad guys. We're nice, we're good. You should be focused on these more white people who want who are more violent towards you and who are more direct in their racism. Don't look at us, look at them. That's what I'm seeing. Because there was later in chapter 1, they're talking about the Beam when he's talking about how America has changed when he comes back. These people, they were for the war when they sent us over, and we come back and now we're the enemy. And it's like, yeah, I mean, the system has to keep running, and sometimes there are going to have to be some losses. So you're it. So that's just my thoughts so far.
Yeah, I had those thoughts as well, as these white supremacists for forming these groups and attempting to fight the more powerful white supremacists who are in charge is a reaction to white sacrifice. Right here it says, but at the end of the tumultuous 1970s, in the wake of the Vietnam War, and in the midst of the economic turmoil and widespread distrust of public institutions, the white power move was consolidated and expanded in these turbulent years. And many Americans lost faith in the state that they had trusted to take care of them. And she mentions this later on how the white people lost their farms, and they were losing factories to overseas. So the white people at this time felt that the incorrect government was not treating them correctly. So they attempted to, I would say, practice the race war in a manner that they're still focused on Black people, but they are going into conflict with the system, like the literal system.
I wanted to answer Ms. Action's question. I do believe that there is some white sacrifice. I think the individual, the white male who came on later in chapter 1, I think his name was Ben or something like that. I think he is a white sacrifice. But something that I thought of, I guess, something I thought of while O5 was speaking was, I don't necessarily think that they were being mistreated. I think that they knew that they were going to war, and you signed up for war, so you're going to be killing people. I think that the major issue that these white people have is the reaction that they received from coming from war, which to me, I think they didn't receive the type of glory that they thought that they were going to receive when they returned. And because that seems to keep coming up, this guy Ben, he talks about how people were spitting on him, calling him the baby killer, and all this other stuff, which I'm sure he absolutely did do those things. So I don't think he was being mistreated. I think he is dissatisfied with the lack of glory that he received from coming back from the war and the government's response, or not the state, the government, the white people in charge, their response. I think that they were absolutely, I would suggest that they are white sacrifices, and they just didn't like the lack of glory.
I agree too, and I think the added context is that this Beam person, I think he was born 1945. He said his father fought in World War II. If you like reading about what I've read about World War II, America didn't join that war until very, very late. And they didn't join until it seemed very likely that the Allied forces would win. So it was very easy for the people, one, to maybe not experience the things that they experienced in Vietnam, and two, to actually come back home to feelings of valor or being valorized. And I think that they saw that and had that expectation. And I do agree that to an extent that they were white sacrifices, but I almost think that the sacrifice is not necessarily that they were treated in an incorrect manner, but less that they were just not exalted as they thought that they would be. Because I think in one line in the book, I didn't highlight it unfortunately, but she says that their ideas about their mistreatment during the Vietnam War, some of it was real and some of it could have just been stories that they told in their head, because we've seen that white people do have a victim complex. So I think that it's a mixture of both of those things.
I think one thing that stood out to me was the part about the leaderless resistance. And I believe there is numbers provided. I wrote down 25,000 members being those who are, I guess, directly associated, who are like, yeah, I'm with the group, I'm with the militia, I'm with the white supremacist group. But then there was another number. Please correct me if I'm wrong with this number. I believe it was like
page four.
I have the PDF version.
I think it's page 17 for page 4 of the actual book.
Okay, thank you. I believe it was 150 to 175,000 in membership. Yes, thank you, who at least read the literature. And I don't know, that was really alarming, but not surprising. And I believe it continued on to say about 5 million were associated with the group, whether they read the material, they directly said they wore the clothing or whatever. I think that showed to me whether they're like, hey, we're fighting the state. It's like, how do you know who's the state and who's not? I mean, they did mention before Ronald Reagan as like the president at some point, I think 1983. So then it got me thinking, like, maybe they're talking about the government directly. But it was very interesting. And I feel like if I were, well, I can't say if I were, because I'm a Black person, victim reading this, but I felt like as I was listening to it, I could see this encouraging white people to continue the efforts, or I guess like, hey, this is a call out, call to action again, even though it's telling, I guess, the story of it, it's almost like another call to action. It gives me weird vibes.
Yeah, just to add to her statement, her comment, it says another 450,000 did not themselves participate or purchase materials, but read the literature. So there you have it right there. Like I said, that was on page 4. Real quick,
Let me go ahead.
I just want to add, pretty much, earlier, prior to reading this book, I did read a little bit of the Turner Diaries. So I kept in mind of the the four ways that white people, keep the system: establishment, maintenance, expansion, refinement. So top of page 2, which is 15 on the PDF, just to answer Mrs. Action question on if they were talking about white sacrifice. It says, though often described by others as white nationalists and by its members as patriotic, this movement did not seek to defend American nation, even when it celebrated some elements of U.S. history and identity. Instead, white power activists increasingly saw the state as the enemy. And pretty much, I think they're talking about, I also think by them saying system or like state, I also think they mean Jews. So that's all I have for right now.
So
Yeah.
I want to point out how what I'm learning about the system of white supremacy, what it is and how it works from this text. At the very beginning of the introduction, we need every one of you proclaimed an anonymous 1985 article in a major white power newspaper. We need every branch of fighting militant whites. We are too few right now to excommunicate each other. Whatever will save our race is what we will do. So this is part of the thought, speech, and behavior that I suspect makes up the white code, how racism is practiced. So this is white people practicing that part of their code where they have to get other white people to help them to practice racism that in the form that they want to. Because we have so-called liberals, so-called Republicans, those are examples of white people convincing other white people, hey, practice racism in this way, be more liberal with racism, or be more Republican with racism. So these white supremacists are wanting the white people to practice racism in the form of militia style white supremacy. So that's one note of many I have about what I'm getting from the white code from this text, but I'll pause there.
Yeah, I wanted to point out a very important concept that Nana Ya mentioned, which is, she said, who is the state and who is not? And I think that is why it's important to, if I ever had a chance to question the author, is I would ask, who is the state and who is not? How can you tell? And this book also reinforces why it is correct for all victims of racism to have a healthy suspicion of all white people. On page 2, which is page 15 in the PDF, a small excerpt says, people from all regions of the country, I think, did you just read this, 05?
No.
No.
Okay. People from all regions of the country answered the white power movement's call to action, bridging the divide between rural and urban. They were men, women, and children, racist man, racist woman, and racist child. They were high school dropouts and holders of advanced degrees, rich and poor, farmers and industrial workers. They were felons and religious leaders. They were civilians, veterans, and active duty military personnel. So that is a great question. Who is the state and who is not? From what I can tell, there is no way to distinguish who is who. All we know is that white people are gathering arms, strategizing on how to act out terrorism against people who I suspect will most likely be non-white. And this is just a great demonstration of that. I mean, it's all throughout the book, reasons to have a healthy suspicion of all white people, of all people classified as white.
I definitely agree with that. From what I got from this text so far, what I'm seeing, how they talk about their gods, how it goes back to like the Nordics, and how they talk about how they're just reinventing themselves. And it reminds me of the Oedipus complex, of how, I believe it's Oedipus, of how the son always fights against the father, or let's say a liberal against a grand old party. I'm seeing a lot of the code of like the state, let's say, being the father that you hate, and you want to kill him because you have your idea of how to run the plantation, and the state is in the way of the neo parties on any platform of running the plantation on how they want to. This text is showing how they kept their communications up, the advent of the internet. It also, what page is this? It goes, we can put it right back into Frances Cress Welsing. It talks about how they were afraid of genetic annihilation. We can put that back into what's going on now in current times. Page is that? I believe it's 24. But how it talks about how the young, well, actually it's 22. How white power also responded to the changing meaning of the state sovereignty and liberal institutions after a decade. But then after, I'm seeing these wars, like the old men send their sons to war, and then their sons come back mad because their dads didn't go. And then they take it out on everybody else. And that's usually going to be on non-white people to change the laws to call it liberal or left wing, right wing.
Yeah, one thing to add to that was how when she was talking about right and left wing, I can't remember what the exact quote is, but she put, white, the so-called movement, I mean, white people practicing racism on one end of the spectrum, and then she put, the Black Panther Party on the left side of it. So just to add to your point of, Black people needing to change the law, I thought that was interesting that she did something like that. I don't want to take up too much space, but one thing that is also very interesting is the contrasting kind of responses to the Vietnam War. Where these white people feel like they were being mistreated, which I don't agree with, but is that Black people, non-white people largely, they come back from the wars, they feel that they've been victimized, which they have, and their response is the civil rights movement, protesting and whatnot. White people's response is to create militias, start training people in army surveillance tactics, gather weapons and arms and ammunition. And it seems like this started in the 1960s, and this largely went on while the so-called government was focusing on Black people, the Black Panthers, COINTELPRO and whatnot, while white people are engaging in these activities. And it seems like, from 1960 up until, she mentions the Oklahoma bombing. And it seems like it went on until that happened. Now, I am not familiar with that situation, the Oklahoma bombing. I heard about it maybe once or twice up until today, up until reading this. And so she also was suggesting that it left a scar on American culture, American politics. But in my view, nobody talks about that. No, politicians may go through great lengths, white people, I should say, go to great lengths of acting like it never happened and it's not a real issue. So I just wanted to add that.
One thing I was, I think it was Yahoo who said that there was a line where she talked about genetic annihilation. I remember reading that line too, and there was a couple parts where I felt like there was things that I had read, and specifically from like the code or from ISIS papers. Like for instance, on page 20, or I don't have the specific page, but it says, following this strategy, independent cells and activists would act without direct contact with movement leadership. The aim was to prevent the infiltration of groups and the prosecution of organizations and individuals by formally dissociating activists from each other and by eliminating official orders. Popularized throughout the underground leaderless resistance changed recruitment goals, emphasizing the importance of enlisting a small number of fully committed activists rather than large groups of the less committed. For me, that reminded me a lot of the code, reminded me a lot of being united and independent, because it seems like they are united under the goal of, white terrorism or racism, white supremacy, but their tactics and the way they function are independent of each other. So I thought that was really, really interesting. I also thought it was interesting because it reminded me of how people often say we need a critical mass. It was more important for them to enlist a small number of fully committed activists rather than large groups of the less committed. It reminds me of kind of how Neely Fuller talks about if someone isn't interested in talking about racism, you shouldn't force them, and you should ask questions and try to find the people who are interested. So I just thought it was really interesting that so much of, or what I thought was a lot of the information from the code, these people are practicing in their own way.
Yeah, that was very interesting. And when they do practice forwallism, like with Waco and Ruby Ridge, it ends fatally. So the leaderless, I was gonna play that from the book, but you read it. But it's my note was the whites, the usual suspects, they find out about the code because this is definitely elements from the code. So because you cover that one, I want to share from the book this part right here. Thought it was very significant, and it's also what Yahoo kind of briefly mentioned on earlier. Let me play it.
White power religious radicalism emerged in part from Cold War understandings of communism as a threat to Christianity. At the same time, a large contingent of white power activists in the post-Vietnam moment believed in white supremacy as a component of religious faith. Christian identity congregations heard their pastors explain that whites were the true lost tribe of Israel, and that non-whites and Jews were descended from Satan or from animals. Other racist churches adopted similar theologies that lauded whiteness as holy and sought to preserve the white race. Activists also adopted Odinism and other forms of neo-pagan white supremacy that posited a shared pan-European white cultural heritage.
It just reminds me of another element of the white code, which is the religion of white supremacy. If we are going to practice any religion, we're going to call it, if we call it Christianity, no matter what we call it, we're going to use it to make us stronger, and we're going to use it to pursue what we perceive to be our purpose. We want to dominate and preserve what we call our race. We're going to do that. And if we're using religion, that's what we're going to use it for. And that is really, really interesting when you compare that to how victims of racism have been trained to view religion. But another more motivation, hopefully, for folks to study Area 7 religion in a different manner, and perhaps to change how we have been practicing that area.
I would like to add to that.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I've talked a lot already, so go ahead, Mr. Yahoo.
Thank you, sir. I just want to add just the 0526 point about the religion area, Area 7. I've seen a definite resurgence in Nordic style rune tattoos on individuals classified as white, a definite resurgence in the race camp that I live in with Wiccan festivals and open air markets. I also want to say, I was listening to another victim on a social media platform, and they were talking after the Peyton Gendron incident. And they mentioned something, and it didn't really hit me until I was watching that movie, The North. And he was talking about how non-white, let's take Ethiopian Christianity or Islam, things that non-white people tend to congregate for in reverence. So those are based off of an actual person. What he was saying is that suspected racist white supremacists, they worship the ideology through the symbol and the energy source. And he was talking in particular with the use of the hammer and the ideology of the hammer. And it reminded me, 0526, when you talked about that passage, that's exactly what I put in my notes when it goes to Odin and the hammer. We can look at the usage of flags, the hammer and the sickle. These two brothers who are fighting, the East and the quote unquote so-called East and the West, but the use of the symbols so that they don't need it to be one person. It's always lone wolf. How, as you were saying, about how it models the United Independent. In my opinion, I would say in Mr. Fuller's, in my attempt to research Mr. Fuller's work and understand the code better, I've seen where he understood the code, and that's how they work as United Independent. And his code structure was to counter that as counter-racist. And I'm mute.
Can I add? So what Mr. Yahweh brought up about the white genetic annihilation with Dr. Prince Press Wilson. This is on page 20 of the PDF and page 7 of the actual book. Top of the page says, amid this multiplicity of symbolic presentations and beliefs, most white power activists found common ground. They believed in white supremacy and the need for a white homeland. They feared that the government would eradicate the white population through interference with the birth of white children through interracial marriage, rape, birth control, abortion, and immigration. So I think that's what he was speaking about. I'm mute.
I was just about to read that part. Thank you for reading that. Just to add, I was kind of going through like some of the laws in my head currently today, especially in California. And I think something recently came up about abortions, and there's a tons of talk with interracial marriages. Well, not really interracial marriages, but definitely immigration. So I was thinking this section came up. Well, I was asking the question, like, in what ways do I see this currently? And I think that is continuously played in my head, that question, because it's almost confusing now. Because I feel like obviously it's another way of, well, I'm going to say allowing it. So allowing immigration is another way or another form of mistreatment and white supremacist ideologies. And then I think of all these other laws. So it's almost like, as we mentioned before, you don't know, well, I'm acting like I don't know. I don't know like who is to be a suspected racist, because it's almost like, well, this person allows interracial marriages, or this person allows X, Y, and Z, or this person allows this. And then it's like, if you don't allow this, then you're part of like the racist man, racist woman, racist children group, the white supremacist group. But then, and as we mentioned, everyone who is white, who is classified as white, should be we should be suspicious of them being a part of the white supremacist group. But I hope I made some sense. But that's all the thoughts that were like going through my head at that very moment, especially when it talks about basically genetic evaluation.
To add, I think it throughout this, the author demonstrated how the white supremacist plays both sides of the chessboard. And I think that's exactly what's going on here. Of the examples that they gave with the eradication of the white population, this gave interracial marriage, rape, birth control, abortion, and immigration. Now, 3 of those, interracial marriage, are non-white people are directly involved in that. So rape, non-white males are often portrayed to be the biggest rapists on the planet, and immigration, which is, again, non-white people. So when I say that it's demonstrating that the white supremacists play both sides of the chessboard, I think they are fully aware that the white people are not going to be attacking other white people. They're going to be they more often than not display this aggression or attack non-white people for these reasons. So I think the white supremacist is definitely aware of this and is manipulating the so-called white sacrifices into doing this. They know that that white people react with violence towards the non-white people on the planet. It continues to maintain the system of white supremacy, and it ensures that non-white people are being abused by it. Earlier, there was a statement mentioned about white people knowing the code or demonstrating a knowledge of the code. And I think due to the system of racism, white supremacy, non-white people are not in tune with logic, the code being logic. I think throughout this, white people have demonstrated that they are in tune with some sort of logic. I think there's different logics on the planet, and white people are demonstrating logic. They know that they want to achieve this goal. This is how they're going to do it, and we are reading about them achieving that. Many non-white people. I mean, it's that's why I talk about the reactions to what's going on in the activities. The reaction to it from non-white people a lot of times seems to be illogical, mainly based in emotion, whereas white people, I think they're thinking logically about this, whether it's racist logic or whatever logic, but they're definitely thinking about this logically.
Can I add to Mr. Kwaku's response to that? Going back to page 15 of the PDF, pretty much it's just the following sentence that he had quoted with the people from all regions of country answered. It says, from its formal unification in 1979 through its 1983 turn to Revolutionary War on the government and its militia phase in the early 1990s, the white power movement mobilized adherents using a cohesive social network based on commonly held beliefs. These activists operated with discipline and clarity, training in paramilitary camps and undertaking assassinations mercenary soldiering, armed robbery, counterfeiting, and weapon trafficking, weapons trafficking. Codification.
Yeah, I think non-white people, a suggestion would be to really to study how white people achieve this, because this is it's just very interesting and quite, I guess, awesome when you really think about it. What they were able to do. I think obviously they have help from the system. I think the system was created so that they can achieve this, and non-white people are going to come across a lot of so-called barriers that prevents them from doing these things. But just follow the logic of white people. I mean, my logic would be to produce a system of justice, and I think there's a logical way of achieving that. So it can be done, just hasn't been produced yet. I think I'm gonna stop there for now.
I'm going to play another quote from the book and then share my notes about it.
Christian identity and other white theologies offered believers no such guarantees of safety. Instead, they held that the faithful would be tasked with ridding the world of the unfaithful, the world's non-white and Jewish population, before the return of Christ. At the very least, the faithful would have to outlast the Great Tribulation, a period of bloodshed and strife. Many movement followers prepared by becoming survivalists, stocking food and learning to administer medical care. Other proponents of white cosmologies saw it as their personal responsibility to amass arms and train themselves to take part in a coming end-times battle that would take the shape of race war.
So that is something we can still see happening today, white people amassing guns. And in 2022, it's been popularized to be a survivalist, to be a doomsday person, a person who is like waiting for the world to end. And this is because the system of white supremacy has trained people classified as white, either has trained them or they're just acting on their subconscious or conscious fear of genetic annihilation. And we're already outnumbered, already surrounded by non-white people. They already think in terms of in all 9 areas of people activity, they're already thinking in terms of war. So very, very profound that this book is I don't know how old this book is, but she's documenting things that took place from 1960s into the late 1990s. But we see characters like from this like Louis Beam. We see characters like that coming out in 2022. We see things like Proud Boys being popularized, being popular in social media, happening in 2022. So that was very interesting. And I'm getting a lot of Yurugu moments from this text. Because the PDF says page 7, but it says here, the white power movement sought revolution and separation, the founding of a racial utopian nation. Now, the Yurugu, it is impossible for a group of white people to establish any type of utopia together. It's not in their thought, speech, and behavior, I suspect. I may be in error, but this author, the way she is talking about races is really interesting to me, and it could be deception, but calling racist white supremacists white power activists instead of racist or white supremacists, I think that may be deception. And she has her reasons and that she mentioned in the beginning of the text, but I see that as more evidence to how she's practicing racism, because she's withholding names of racists. And according to the code, we should know the names of racists.
just to add to that,
Mhm.
because I actually did write down notes from the note to reader portion. Um, she was saying that she's like using the white power to be more accurate than many other terms, but also white supremacy, being that those terms are not accurate in her eyes. Her keeping secrets on like keeping certain names out the book. Um, then also something that was similar to me reading the Turner Diaries. She was saying it was some type of a new right in this book, and in the Turner Diaries, it was talking about the new era. So just to add to that from what 0526 is saying. You.
I agree a lot with the not including names, because for so-called Islamic terrorists, they seem to always include their names, the names of their children and family members. But yet somehow, even though these people are supposed to be, or these people do commit acts of terrorism, and she talks about the people who are victimized by them, she seems to really want to respect their anonymity. Even in the beginning, she puts, I don't think she specifies the White Power magazine or print that she that the original quote is from, instead of just saying where it's from. I find that to be really interesting.
I would agree. I thought throughout reading this, the use of her language suggests that she sympathizes with these white terrorists and these white racists. Sorry, not white racists, but these racists. uh, as we're sitting here talking about it, and one word that I think I'm going to have to avoid using is the word activist, because I do not, when I first heard the word activist, I usually associated with it, trying to attempt to produce justice. But now that she's using it here, I don't think I can use that word. If these racist white supremacists are considered activists. I also thought it was very interesting in the beginning when she started talking about the term white power and the terms that you should avoid using. One term that did not come up was white supremacy. I thought that she mentioned white supremacists. So it says some have described this group of people with the terms white nationalists, white separatists, the racist right, or white supremacists. None of these terms is appropriate for describing the larger movement. And I suspect I wrote down, I suspect they all advocate for white supremacy. So it doesn't really matter to me. I think I'm going to continue using the word white supremacy. Although white power is accurate, but I suspect she is attempting to practice racism by having individuals use the term white power, because white power necessarily doesn't admit that white supremacy exists. It admits that white people have power, which they do, but is not, for me, is not the same thing as white supremacy. And then some other examples that I wrote down, I'll just share one or two, because I mean it's kind of throughout the whole thing. She talks about how there's all this kind of documentation, all this kind of evidence that exists. She talks about how the media will deliberately obfuscate the reportings, making it seem like there's a lone, this is like a one-off white person, a lone wolf type person committing acts of terrorism, and which she, I think, correctly says is not the case. But for me, that demonstrates that the system is still protecting, aiding, abetting these white people in their terrorist acts. And then also in some of her language on page 13, which is 26 in the PDF, she seems to suggest that some of the evidence cannot be used or is not correct. She mentions and what is available comes with the same complication as any trial record. Some people who testified about their roles in the movement, especially women, may have done so under the threat of separation from their families. Several activists made plea deals in return for testifying against the movement. Legal documents, especially testimonies, must be read with such motivations in mind. I mean, for me, I think there are a ton of examples of where non-white people were under the threat of their lives, but did not receive any such courtesy. So I think as long as the system exists, I'm going to treat white people how non-white people are being treated. So, and then she also mentions a little bit further down about the watchdog groups, and essentially is saying that, I don't like using the word bias. I haven't come up with a different word yet, but she's suggesting that these watchdog groups could possibly have different motives. So for me, I interpret that as they are, trying to make it seem worse than it is, maybe. It says watchdog groups can have motives that reach beyond simple documentation. They exist through fundraising and donations, may increase when there is a sense of urgency. Watchdog groups may have sometimes overestimate the movement's influence and level of organization. That last sentence, what are you trying to say? Are you saying that the problem isn't as great as it is? Because for me, this is a huge problem, an absolutely massive problem. I'm gonna mute my mic.
What I would say to add to that is, from what I've heard about I think she's quoting here, the Southern Poverty Law Center. They're very quick to, because they do that with a lot of Black so-called organizations too, is label them as terroristic or label them as like a threat to people's lives. And they are very quick to do that with any Black groups that don't really speak in a manner that is supporting the system. I wouldn't put it past those groups to do that, like the Southern Poverty Law Center, because like she states before, it's not really about how many people, it is important that there's a lot of people, but it's also important that even if it's a small amount, they're so much more committed. And obviously it shows that they're so much more willing to give up their lives and, commit acts of terrorism that take a lot of people's lives away, that I don't think it does really matter if it's necessarily, I think she's trying to imply that what really matters is their commitment to the cause. But I may be wrong. I don't want to imply something that she's saying. But a couple of things that I was thinking about too is, one thing that I was thinking about is that the book is written in 2018. I believe Dylann Roof
2014.
Did his massacre. Was that 2015 or 2016?
Oh, no, my fault. It was in 2015. Sorry about that.
So I find it interesting that it wasn't stated in here. It almost implies that this is something the proliferation or of these groups is something that has happened in the past, even though we see that there's a huge resurgence of them. So I thought that was interesting, and I was wondering anyone's thoughts on why you think that the author omitted, at least in the introduction, connecting these groups to the acts that happen now. And also, the Columbine shooters, etc. A lot of these people, even if the media doesn't show it, they had a lot of white supremacist pamphlets and drawings and artwork, etc., that showed that they also kind of supported these types of movements. So I think that it's a lot stronger than now. And I don't think she even brings up anything that has to do connecting it to the present at all. I may be wrong though.
Let's start. Go ahead. Sorry about
I would just like to add to that. I've seen that as a tactic that suspected racists use. I call it, for one, the time traveler where they try to link things into the past so your mind goes somewhere else. They're standing right in front of you. And then the next one, even the cover of the book, like the author is very refined. Even the cover, she wants you to think that the racist white supremacists are people that look like what's on the cover of the book, instead of just your neighbor next door to you, or somebody you work next to, or your nurse, or your Uber driver. Like, it's just a high level of diversion. Can you look one way and it's happening right in front of you? And she's very, very, very skillful at that. Like, she's explaining all the parts, admitting what's happening, but like several people were saying that she never ties it together. So I find that as a tactic that they use very often. It's never tying everything together and wanting to separate it. And that definitely goes back to the synopsis of your movie.
Really quickly, I just want to comment on what you said about the cover, because yes, for the folks listening, they want us to think the racists look like the people who wear the racist insignias and the Klan hoodies and the skinheads, but the people you should suspect to be racist and to look like racists are people who are classified as white, and they can look like the people you see on the screen right now. They could be children, they could be bigger children, they could be adults, teenagers, but they can only, and they will always be white. They can't be black, they can't be anything else but people classified as white. Racist man and racist woman and racist child.
Go ahead, Monsoon, because you had your hand raised.
Yeah, no problem. Just to add, because like I did watch her interviews on YouTube, and the one I think she teaches some like gender studies class, so I got a feminist vibe from her, and like again, just to add to Mr. Yahweh's point, where it's a lot of obfuscating that white women aren't really the main reason why this exists. Like, so yeah, like, but based on her interviews, she did not come across as if white women were also the cause for neo-Nazism, Nazis or the KKK. So that's it.
I have a Welsing moment and a racist man and racist woman working together strategy right here from page 8 of the PDF, where it says, however, the white power movement departed from mainstream paramilitary culture and carving out an important place for women, relied on as symbols of the cause and as activists in their own right. As bearers of white children, women were essential to the realization of white power's mission to save the race from annihilation. And I think this is what some of the other hosts were thinking about when they were referring to the Welsing moment, that they know this. But racist man, racist woman, racist child, I suspect they know that the white woman is hugely important to the system of white supremacy, because that is the only way white children come to this planet. So I thought she's sharing a lot of information about how it's the whole race family working together, but also she's not sharing all the information she could have because she's practicing, I suspect, racism.
Yeah, I mean, again,
I would say,
no, sorry.
no, pardon me, go ahead.
No, it's just again, yeah, based on the book, yeah, like it's like clear as day. But in her interview, he just tried to like, not bring that up. But go ahead, Mr.
Just the whole idea of of the culture of the family, we see these archetypes. How Mr. Fuller puts it, the religion of white supremacy. So you have the mother, the father, and the child. So the mother reproduces a child that always hates the mother and the father. And we see that pattern all the time, all over the world. So in the way they were describing the things that happened in Vietnam, like those people, some of those people, let's say in the GOP, might still be alive. So you see people on street corners, like how you're saying about not being a protester, but an activist. Very, very, very keen observation, especially with doublespeak in terms of an activist. Well, what are you trying to activate? And I haven't seen anything that has been out here in the public activating any sort of justice. So I would say that it still goes back to just this internal struggle of creating conflict and different ways of just practicing different versions of racism, white supremacy, almost like an MMA. Like each fighter has a different way of practicing it, whether they're old or they're young, but the young's always trying to kill the old. Maybe even seen in Roman with the two wolves.
Yeah, to answer Ash's question, I think it was deliberately left out. I think even from her introduction, where she's talking about how she plans on, I guess, talking about what she plans on talking about in the book, she seems to stop around 1983. Which for me suggests that the issue stops in 83. I mean, even throughout the book, she's kind of talking about, the climax of it all was the 83 bombing in Oklahoma City. So I think it's deliberately done deception. Even the cover, as some of the victims of racism on the line pointed out, the cover is even deceiving, because once again, you don't see the white family unit that she mentioned. Instead, you see a white male, a Klan robe, and a gun. So it seems to suggest that the white male, once again, is the white power movement, and the white female has no part to play. I mean, you wouldn't know that unless you read the book or started to get into it. Off the cover images, for me, that's what's suggesting.
I agree. And I think too, it's very interesting because if you look at how much this type of stuff, like white supremacist propaganda has permeated into social media. I don't know if you have ever heard of a influencer. Her name is Mrs. Midwest. She's like this influencer, and the big thing now that it's Mrs. like MRS. The big thing that white women do now to do recruiting is they do this trad wife, like a traditional wife, and they're teaching other white women how to, like, you know, take care of the home, etc. But underneath all of that is a lot of they lure you in with that, but really it's white supremacy. If you read a lot of her like comments, her posts, her YouTube videos, you'll see her talking about, you know, non-white people, etc. And it's very interesting because she has, you know what I mean? She has a nice, welcoming smile. So I think even a lot of people will kind of, I guess, get lured into that. So I think that white women play a huge role in promoting, I guess, these type of white supremacist groups, and they do a lot of recruitment work. Like, you know, they're talking about this whole Christian identity thing. Who do you think is a big factor in churches? Most of the people who do the work in churches are the women, the females. Those are the people who are recruiting these types of groups. So I thought that was really interesting. another part that I wanted to talk about was there's a line that says another factor was emerging economic threat. The post-World War II welfare state had promised jobs, education, and health, but beginning in 1973, a series of economic shocks displaced the expectation of continued growth and prosperity. An oil crisis brought about the realization that natural resources would not always be cheap and plentiful. Wealth inequality grew and unemployment rose. So I guess the question that I had was, in this line, it seems like she's discussing that white people were almost like having to deal with the fact that this is the question I have is, do you think that white people have the capability to beat or overcome nature? If yes, how? And if not, what ways do white supremacists respond to nature, like nature as in natural disasters, global warming, etc.? And how do those responses affect non-white people? I hope my question makes sense.
I'm gonna need you to ask it one at a time. I think the first one was, how do I believe that white people can overcome nature? Was that the first question?
Have the power and capability to overcome or beat nature, i.e. natural disasters, global warming, etc.
So when you say overcome nature, you mean like control nature?
Yes,
Or
the fact that natural resources ultimately are finite. How do you think that white people can come up with a way to make them not finite or exist in a way where they control nature completely?
I guess if I understand the question correctly, I think the evidence suggests that white people cannot, I think it's clear for me if I say live in harmony with nature. I think the evidence suggests that they cannot live in harmony with nature. That is why there are so-called finite resources. I think that the planet is meant to be abundant and there's more than enough on the planet for everybody. But due to the Urugu, the white people on the planet in charge, and their lack of ability to produce justice, they have created a disparable situation on the planet. I hope that was clear. Did that answer the question?
My question is, do you think that white people can control nature?
I would quickly, were you finished?
You can, okay, no, hold on. Let me try to answer the question. Control nature. I'm having a hard time understanding what you mean by that. Like, what do you mean when you say control nature? Like, I mean, they can manipulate nature and they can get it to do things, but I don't think they can control nature. I don't think anybody can control nature. I think that they attempt to control nature. That's why the planet is in the condition it's in, or the way they manipulate nature. That's the reason why. Did that answer the question? I guess I just don't know what you mean by control.
Yes, that answered the question.
Okay, go ahead, O5.
I think racist man, racist woman, they're all about controlling and dominating everything, and nature is highly included in that. And what do I understand nature as? Trees growing, they have the ability to stop trees from growing. They have the ability to control the weather. They have the ability to control what the animals are doing in the nature. So, and what they do has large effects on the nature. So whether they're controlling it directly or indirectly, they definitely have some control over what I call nature, what I observe to be nature. Miss Ash.
Okay, thank you. The second part of my question was, how do you think white people respond when they can't control aspects of nature? And how does that affect non-white people?
We see when the control cannot happen, that is when the target is not a target of subjugation and domination any longer. It is a target of elimination. So that's how I see it. That makes sense?
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Can you say the question again?
Yes. How do you think white people respond when they cannot control nature? And how do you think that affects non-white people?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I think I feel that maybe the way the question is set up, it's kind of like, I don't believe it's kind of like linear. Like it's, they try to control nature, they aren't able to, then they make another step. Like I feel it's kind of like all happening at once. So in their attempts to, when they, I'm not gonna waste time. I just don't know.
Okay, no problem. I hope my question makes sense. It's mostly asking like, because in this line she talks about the fact that there was an oil shortage, etc. Though those things are probably caused by white people. I'm wondering, there's white people who have more power than other white people. And when those white people have to deal with the fact that there's limiting resources, how do you think that they respond? And I think she alluded to it by talking about how they stock up and they become kind of like those doomsday preppers and things like that. I was mostly asking it because it kind of ties into how we're existing right now. As you can see, like things are really expensive right now. There's shortages in baby formula, etc. And though those are not exactly due to controlling of nature, I was more wondering, how do white people who don't have that much power to control those things, how do they respond to that? And how does it affect non-white people? But we can move on to something else because it may be a kind of convoluted question.
If I could add something just to that, just real quick, that was a great point. And only because we went over in a decoding, just you putting it in that context reminded me of George Miller in Mad Max, because with the oil in particular, that's what happened in Australia in like 1977 or 76, I want to say, and people literally started killing each other over gasoline. And that's where Mad Max comes from. So to answer your question, that is, in my opinion, I suspect that is how white people would respond with limited resources. We can look at Mad Max in particular.
Yep. And before they go attempt to get it from white people, they will attempt to get it from non-white people who are less dangerous than other white people.
Yeah, I think the context helped me a lot. So with that last example, I think white people would usually respond with violence. I think it's the practicing racism, right? It's either deceit or the threat of violence or indirect violence. So you have a group of white people who will probably respond with violence. Using the example of the oil shortage, right? I think that a group of white people, a group of white supremacists will respond by trying to be deceitful. Oh, the reason why there's no oil, I think they'll attempt to kind of shift blame or shift the subject try to get people to focus on something else. Oh, you know, the rising oil and gas prices isn't the issue. The issue is that there's immigrants coming into the country and stuff like that. So I think it's really, the response is how do white people practice white supremacy? Deceit, confusion, and the threat of violence, of direct or indirect violence.
The chat has a Sarah Kiss said they respond by becoming preppers and buying guns and forming militias. The chat has been saying a number of constructive things throughout the discussion. Christine Williams brought up the 200 cows that suddenly died. Carice Johnson, she says yes about nature. She says yes, they can manipulate it, but it's unnatural. And Miss Christine Williams brought up the heart. That's something victims of racism should definitely research. But Sarah Kiss brought up something I thought was really significant about the white code, and reminded me of what when Quaker was talking about, how the author was mentioning about obfuscation, however you say that word, when they're reporting on these white supremacists, when they go on their rampages and they kill, when they commit a terrorist attack and it's reported as lone wolf, you know, he had mental illnesses, he was working alone. That is a part of the don't snitch white code, you know, the detectable pattern of white people not telling on each other, white people not blaming the system of white supremacy, because you know you can never blame, you know, what we're all, you know, to use a slang metaphor, you can't blame what we're all eating off of. You know, we all eat off this system of white supremacy. So, you know, blame the guns, you know, gun control, replacement theory, but not the system of white supremacy. So don't snitch code is what that means. Blame anything but the system. And thank you for that, Sarah Kiss.
I have a question. My question is, in learning about this and white people, suspected racists all across the globe and the nation, buying up arms, what should non-white people's codified response be?
Attempt to prepare for the worst and to do the same as for gathering defenses and resources, food to last.
I agree. And I think too, like 0526 was saying, and to add on to that, eliminating, at least attempting to eliminate your dependency on the white supremacists, if that means learning to grow your own food, learning medical practices, etc., to prepare.
So from the text, I have still a number of notes I wanted to share. So let me play this.
Most white power activists found common ground. They believed in white supremacy and the need for a white homeland. They feared that the government would eradicate the white population through interference with the birth of white children, through interracial marriage, rape, birth control, abortion, and immigration. The anti-Semitism long espoused by the Klan was reinforced by neo-Nazis, and the movement adopted a strict set of gender and familial roles, particularly—
this is, someone read this. I mean, we discussed this already. This is the wrong one. I'm going to play the correct one. Unless folks wanted to comment on that one.
Nah, I think you're talking about the journalist clip.
No,
Yeah,
I'm gonna play it. It's a part of
okay.
how racist man and racist woman will scapegoat. I'll play it.
However, the white power movement departed from mainstream paramilitary culture in carving out an important place for women, relied on as symbols of the cause and as activists in their own right. As bearers of white children, women were essential to the realization of white power's mission, to save the race from annihilation. More concretely, their supporting roles, auxiliary organizations, and recruiting skills sustained white power as a social movement. They brokered social relationships that cemented intergroup alliances and shaped the movement from within. In all these ways, its unity, revolutionary commitments, organizing strategy, anti-communist focus, and Vietnam War inheritance, white power was something new.
So white power has never been something new. They've had white power since they waged this war against us. Some say has been going on for thousands of years. But again, this is not the clip I was attempting to play. It's when they're talking about the conspiracy theory. So let me go to see if it's right here.
Activists such as David Duke mounted political campaigns that influenced local and national elections. They produced a vibrant print culture with crossover appeal that reached more mainstream individuals. They traveled from church to church, linking religious belief with white power ideology. They created a series of computer message boards to further their cause. They pursued social ties between groups, cementing their political affinities with one another through marriages and other intimate bonds.
So this has been like ramped up to 1,000 degrees with internet culture. White supremacy has been able to recruit like children and train race soldiers at a very young age with this internet stuff. And with David Duke, what he was able to do like decades ago without the internet, people are able to do very, very, very easily. So we have characters now who are racist symbols like, let me bring this guy up. This guy right here. This is a white supremacist symbol. You know, many folks will not understand this or see this, but when folks are familiar with 4chan and whatnot, you will understand that Pepe the Frog is used for a lot of practice of racism. David Duke is, I suspect, to be no different from the likes of Dylan Roof, Gendron S. Payton, the Buffalo terrorist attack. So very, very, very telling. The meme culture, what they call it, very dangerous and very powerful, and just producing millions upon millions of highly refined racist children. I suspect. Yeah, this is a cartoon character, and you could have this character, you could find this character in schools, you know, and in notebooks of many white children, and many non-white people see this character. Oh, just a frog. It's a frog. Not knowing that if they were to go on 4chan or Chimp Out or a number of other racist areas in the internet, they will see this this character here being animated and being put in comics promoting just racism. I'll keep going with my notes. I have more from the book I wanted to. Oh, also here, I'm probably gonna read it and then play it by let me see. Okay, here it is. So this is from, it says page 8 of the PDF. After your unifying feature of the movement was its stringent anti-communism, which at first aligned with mainstream Cold War conservatism, and then transformed into apocalyptic, anti-internalistic, anti-Semitic set of belief and conspiracy theories about what activists call the Zionist occupational government, ZOG, and later the New World Order. Increasingly, white power activists believe that the Jewish-led ZOG controlled the United Nations, the US federal government, and the banks, and that the ZOG used people of color, communists, liberals, journalists, academics, and other enemies of the movement as puppets in a conspiracy to eradicate the white race and its economic, social, and cultural accomplishments. So I've heard the Jewish people and the so-called and the Zionist people be scapegoated as to being white supremacy is not the problem. The Zionists are, the Jews are. I've heard this from white people when talking to them about racism, white supremacy. That's again the white code. Hey, don't talk about the system, scapegoat. Zionists, Jewish people, they're not to blame for the world's major problem. It is racist man, a racist woman, and racist child. And this new world order thing, we've seen a number of politicians, utter that those 3 words that we're gonna bring in this new world order. Well, not if they do bring in some sort of new world order, that's just gonna be a new stage of racism, white supremacy, greater mistreatment or refining the mistreatment that non-white people will experience under the system. It's not going to be anything new about it, but there still would be order, and that white people are in charge and controlling us. This Louis Beam character, I'm continuing on with my notes. This Louis Beam, this character is I think a number of white people are mentioned in this text, like well, can't mention them, can't remember off the top of my head, but Louis Beam is one of the white supremacists we should know about it. He was dedicated to the race war. He was very dedicated to the race war, and he spoke about the race war somewhat honestly, and he understood that his purpose on this planet is seeing this to go against people he classifies as non-white. That's what I got from it. And this, I'm gonna play this text. This demonstrates his dedication, this part right here.
But he never stopped fighting. Beam would use his Vietnam War story to militarize a resurgent Ku Klux Klan and to wage a white power revolution. He brought many things home with him: his uniforms, virulent anti-communism, and hatred of the Viet Cong. He brought home the memory of death and mutilation, sealed in heavy-duty body bags. He brought home racism, military training, weapons proficiency, and a readiness to continue fighting.
So we still see that 2022 people are coming home from Afghanistan, and they join or form white supremacist organization or groups. So this book came out 2018 and highly significant, and is I would say profound. And I'll pause my line.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question. I've pretty much finished up my notes. So in light, not in light. So after reading the text, one question I thought of towards the end was, is the system protecting the white people of the so-called white power movement? or are they too smart for the system? That's the question for the group. If anybody's willing to answer.
I would say it's one and the same, and that's how warfare is used with the tactic of divide and conquer. It's making your enemy think that it's one or the other when it's the same. And you might have infighting between, the end goal, but that's how I see it. I see it's one and the same.
Thank you, Mr. Yawu. I'm not sure if anybody else has any other thoughts. If you do, if you don't, that's okay too. But I guess my suggestion after reading this, the introduction and the first chapter would be for, the same one. And I think a book needs to be written on this, but I think it is correct for non-white people to develop a healthy suspicion of all people classified as white, as long as the system of white supremacy exists. I think that the author produces a lot of evidence that suggests to think otherwise would be illogical. As she mentioned in the text, there's pretty much no way to figure out who is a racist and who's not. As Nanaya mentioned earlier, who is the state and who are the white supremacists? Who's the state and who's not? So my suggestion after reading this text would be to develop a healthy suspicion of all people classified as white until the system of racism, white supremacy has been ended. If white people don't like hearing that, then end the system. If Black people don't like hearing that, if non-white people don't like hearing that, let's produce justice. That's it. If anybody else wants to answer the question, I'd appreciate a response. If not, that is also okay too.
So I want to mention all these characters that racist characters that the author mentions in this second section that we covered. One of them is this Tom Posey guy, and she says here from 18 of the PDF. Tom Posey served in the Marines, in Vietnam, and then in the Alabama National Guard. He flirted with the John Birch Society and violent Klan action before founding a mercenary group, Civilian Military Assistance, which carried out acts of violence in Central America and on the U.S. border. So let's like the double speak, the bizarre language. He flirted with the white supremacist organization. That's really silly language usage, I would say. How do you flirt with organization? It's just the author not wanting to say that he was involved, he was practicing racism, white supremacy. Possibly that is that obfuscation we've been talking about. And right next to him, there's another character. My device spazzed out, so I have to find it again. 1 second. Okay, so next to Tom Posey, there's this and these characters, these people, these white supremacists, they demonstrate awesome white power. I think what they were able to do. It said from the same page 18, says Glenn Miller claimed 20 years of Army service, including 2 tours in Vietnam as a Green Beret, before he was discharged for distributing racist literature. He subsequently organized a paramilitary white power group that obtained stolen weapons and material from military installations, enlisted active duty troops as members and trainers, and declared war on the government. So yeah, this person gathered like a small army, it seems, kind of like the film Apocalypse Now, but he did it in its real existence, it seems. Another powerful white supremacist that none of us have heard about until this text is Bob Matthews. And I'm pretty sure research into any of these guys would just one will learn a lot about what it means to be white and just what white power garners you, the access, and what you're able to do with white power. So it says here about Bob Matthews. Bob Matthews was in a car on the way to enlist at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, when he abruptly changed his mind. He had heard a radio story about the prosecution of Lieutenant Williams Cawley for the massacre of hundreds of Vietnamese civilians at My Lai. Matthews believes such acts of violence were justified and saw Cawley's prosecution as evidence of government betrayal of American soldiers. The episode dissuaded him from enlisting and shored up his belief in the irredeemable corruption of the state. Matthews would ultimately found the Order, a white power terrorist group, to wage war against the federal government. And then another powerful white supremacist, Michael Perdue, who attempted to invade the Caribbean island of Dominica to create a puppet government that would funnel money back to the Klan, spoke of a military mercenary combat record that was quickly proven false. Whether they served or not, activists took from the war a tangle of testimony and potent narratives, as well as a set of uniforms, weapons, and political rhetoric. So Bob Matthews is a example of a white person who at first is going to help the system to practice racism in a way that the system is attempting to do so. You know, I'm going to help the system to go kill these yellow people in Vietnamese. But he changed his mind because he didn't approve how the system was, you know, handling race soldiers for, you know, mistreating the Vietnamese people. So he changed his mind. He formed his own white supremacist group. He practiced racism in his own manner. Michael Perdue literally attempts to invade an area of the world where non-white people are to wage war against the system of white supremacy. This is white power. I can't point to any non-white organizations where individuals are attempting to do these things because we do not have that white power, that we don't have a whole system behind us.
Yeah, I thought that part was fascinating because I had never heard of that, especially the one where they're trying to, there's even a whole book about it when they're trying to invade Dominica. And I thought that was really interesting. Has anyone else heard about that?
No, ma'am.
She talks about, the author talks about how the white supremacists produced this whole aesthetic behind the Vietnam. What can I say? Vietnam War. Speech impediment.
Vietnam.
I don't know.
You good.
They produced this whole rhetoric and aesthetic behind it. You know, with the some of them were even pretending to be veterans because there was like a whole narrative. We got betrayed by our government. You know, the citizens and society, when we came back from Vietnam, we were mistreated by the people who were supposed to give us glory. So that produced a whole series of films like The Deer Hunter, Platoon, Full Metal Jacket, this whole aura of being a vet, a non-vet, that meant a lot. So we had white supremacists pretending to be these things. I thought that was very, very significant. And maybe that's why to this day, the whole that aesthetic of white supremacy group dressing up in camouflage fatigues and whatnot. You know, this is stuff that the likes of Timothy McVeigh, Michael Perdue, Bob Matthews, Tom Posey, these people started this, normalized this, popularized this. You know, the likes of Dylan Roof, Ginton Patron, Anders Breivik, Brennan Tarrant, all these people were inspired by David Duke, Louis Beam. There's a whole lore to the system of white supremacy racism that we are just now finding out about because we are confused victims and we're still learning. I certainly am still learning. I'm just now getting hip to all this information.
Yeah, I just to add, I mean, when this white female was going through the names of all these white men, the only one I knew was Randy Weaver, and that's only because of the Waco. No, it wasn't the Waco. It was the Ruby Ridge incident. So most of this is new knowledge to me. So yeah, I would definitely be researching some of these white men from this first chapter of the book. I'll meet.
Yeah, I want to just comment on the sentiments that were present during the Vietnam War. It says from page 22, some soldiers made sport of throwing rocks at civilians, shooting at them with slingshots and pelting them with debris from passing vehicles. As one 25th Infantry soldier remembered, everybody was a zip, gook, or animal. Another said soldiers regarded the Vietnamese as subhuman and noted that seeing a dead gook was no big deal. So this is how racist men and racist women are masters at teaching people how to kill, and they have I suspect been training us how to do this for a long time with the use of objectification, you know, training our minds to view people as creatures, as objects, as targets that can be mistreated and treated horribly. There's this part reminds me of all the Hollywood films that has glamorized the Vietnam War. And Apocalypse Now, there's a very famous scene where there's a Vietnamese soldier, his guts are hanging out, and he just, you know, he's reaching up to the white man for help. And then the white man says, he sees the dying yellow victim. He says, this you can drink from my canteen any day because, you know, because you're dying proudly, I guess. But that just goes to show the insanity and how we've been trained to be masters of killing and just insane, just totally insane. And yeah, this is normal. Louis Beam was a Vietnam vet who used what happened in the Vietnam War to inspire, I suspect, probably millions of white people to, hey, you know, don't go as a status quo of white supremacy. You know, don't try to be refined. Don't try to do any of that. We need to practice racism in our own way. We need to maybe attempt to get rid of a lot of these Black people directly, not with poisons, not with cancer, not how the more powerful white supremacists have been doing it. No, walk into a church, walk into a grocery store, take them out. This is the sort of white power movement situations that have been inspired, I suspect, by the likes of David Duke, Louis Beam, Thomas Posey, Bob Matthews, Michael Perdue, all these, the usual suspects that I mentioned in this book. And I'm sure we're going to learn about a lot more as we read and learn from this text.
Definitely agree. I think that is a really great point, that there's a lot more people we're going to learn about that is going to be able to add to our understanding of the system. I wanted to get into closing thoughts or final thoughts by anyone. So if anyone wanted to share their final thoughts on the introduction and the first chapter, and thoughts about, I guess, what they'll be learning about moving forward.
My closing comment is that it is June 20th, 2022, and white people are not confused about the race war they are maintaining against non-white people. And I hope non-white people become hip to that.
I guess for my closing comment, it was the passage on page 21 of the book page, but 34 in the PDF, to where these white men that were during this Vietnam War, they would take pretty much says in Vietnam created a situation in which violence against civilians, mutilation of bodies, souvenir collecting, sexual violence, and other war crimes were not just isolated incidents, but ubiquitous features of war that permeated the chain of command. And pretty much, I got a lot of Delectable Negro and necrophilia from that section of the book. I guess what I'm hoping to learn more is how the white women are are dedicated to the system of racial white people. I mean,
Yeah, the Sour Kids mentioned from the chat when we've been naming all the names. She says there are no white women. That's very correct. There's hopefully the author has added some in here. I hope she's not the only suspected white woman we're going to be hearing from, but that may be the case. We shall see. And from the chat, racist white supremacists don't like being white sacrifices, of course, and no one would want to be sacrificed if they were aware that's what they were being used for. Closing comments from any of the other folks, any of the host, I should say.
I think for me, it's so far, I've learned a lot, and it's helpful to read and discuss it with this group because I'm able to understand places where the author may obfuscate and places where there's things to research more, especially the different people that she mentioned, as well as, for instance, them trying to take over a whole island, things like that, things that I have not learned before. So I'm interested, especially in the next chapter, because it may go through more of how they organize and more of their, I guess, paramilitary organization or organizing. So That's all I have so far.
That reminds me, the author, she's being highly deceptive because Agent Orange was only mentioned, like one sentence of Agent Orange was mentioned, and the yellow people in Vietnam are still suffering from the effects of Agent Orange. And as a younger victim of racism, I was always fascinated with the Vietnam War. And I suspect now I know why, because this has been hugely important and producing just this different stages, no, not stages, but different ways that white people decided to practice racism, white supremacy during and after Vietnam.
Yeah, that was
introduced.
Sorry about that. It was page 31 of the book of the Agent Orange. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. But I suspect the Vietnam War and what it produced after it is directly, and as the author has actually demonstrated, is directly related to school shootings, mass shootings, I should say, well, I should just say racist terrorist attacks. So highly significant. I hope we gave this section a thorough discussion. I hope folks who are tuning into this broadcast will find constructive value in it, and I will meet my line.
I want to say this book I find it highly constructive in understanding some of the, as Joe Fegan says, like the backstage of white supremacy, like why some of these major events happened and what was actually going on, and then how that still aligns with the worldview, we can say in terms of Urugu. So I just hope that this book in particular is shared by non-whites with other non-whites, so we can get a better understanding on what's going on right now, because they'll always tell you something's in the past and it looks like this and it's right in front of you. I'm in my line.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining the book club meeting for Bringing the War Home, the White Power Movement and Paramilitary America. We were discussing the introduction and chapter 1, and next week we will be discussing chapter 2 and 3. Thank you.
You are alive. You are alive.
No.